They say the desert keeps secrets better than any grave, but on the night the screams stopped echoing across the red mesas, even the coyotes fell silent. Hello, my friends. This is Malik Jefferson, narrator of Slave's Revenge, and today you will hear a story that will touch every part of your heart. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It's always exciting to know how far our stories reach. Get ready, because the excitement begins now. The sun hung like an executioner's blade over the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man. It was not a name given lightly. The desert stretched endless and merciless, a sea of sand and stone where water was myth and shade was prayer. The air shimmered with heat that could crack a man's sanity before it cracked his lips. Vultures circled overhead in lazy spirals, patient as time itself. Nalin walked through this wasteland as if it were her garden. Her feet, bare and calloused, made no sound on the scorched earth. She wore deerskin dyed with ochre and indigo, decorated with patterns that told stories her people had carried for generations. Her hair, black as obsidian, hung in a single thick braid down her back, threaded with eagle feathers and small bones that clicked softly as she moved. Around her neck hung a medicine pouch made from the skin of a mountain lion. Inside it, herbs and stones that held power, older than Spanish conquest, older than the very notion of borders. She was 26 winters old, but her eyes carried the weight of something ancient. The Apache called her Nalin, maiden in their tongue, but it was spoken with reverence, sometimes fear. She had been marked by the spirit since childhood, when she'd fallen into a 3-day fever and woken, speaking in voices that weren't her own. The elders said she walked between worlds, that she could see the threads that connected all living things, that she could pull on those threads and make reality bend. Her visions came like summer lightning, sudden, brilliant, impossible to ignore. That morning, she had seen him. A man lying in the sand, his body broken, his spirit flickering like a candle in wind. But around that dying flame, she had seen something else, a darkness that pulsed with rage, so pure it seemed to have weight, to have breath. In her vision, she had reached toward him, and the darkness had reached back. "You should not go alone," her grandmother had said, grinding corn in the cool darkness of their wickiup. "The spirits are restless. They smell blood." "They always smell blood, grandmother." Nalin had gathered her medicine bundle, checking each herb, each root, each preparation she might need. The Spanish bring blood, the Mexicans bring blood, the Americans bring blood. The desert drowns in it. This is different. The old woman's hands had stilled. Her eyes, milky with cataracts, seemed to focus on something beyond the physical world. "What you seek to heal, it may heal you instead, or devour you both." But Nalin had already been walking toward the door, toward the vision, toward destiny. Now, miles from her village, she climbed a ridge of red sandstone and looked down into a shallow arroyo. The sun was directly overhead, turning the world into a furnace. Heat rose from the rocks in visible waves, distorting the air into liquid shimmer. And there, exactly where her vision had shown her, was the man. He lay on his side in the shadow of a boulder, the only shade for miles. His body was a map of brutality, back crisscrossed with whip scars, some fresh and weeping, others old and keloid. A brand marked his shoulder, a cruel letter M, burned deep into dark skin. His wrists bore the raw circles of iron shackles, and one ankle was broken, bent at an angle that made Nalin's stomach tighten. He wore only torn trousers, stained with blood and dirt. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. Nalin descended into the arroyo with careful steps, watching for rattlesnakes and loose stone. As she approached, she could smell him, sweat and blood and infection, but beneath it something else, something like ozone before a storm. She knelt beside him, placed her medicine bundle on the ground, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was there, faint and erratic, a drumbeat losing its rhythm. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. His lips moved slightly, cracked and bleeding. No sound emerged. Nalin looked back the way he must have come. In the distance, perhaps 10 miles south, she could see the faint trace of wagon ruts, the Santa Fe Trail, where merchants and slavers moved their human cargo from Texas into the newly expanding territories. He must have escaped or been thrown out to die. Either way, he had crawled this far on a broken ankle through country that killed strong men. That alone told her his spirit was formidable. She opened her medicine bundle and began to work. First, water. Not much, just enough to wet his lips and tongue. He swallowed reflexively, a good sign. Then she examined his wounds, starting with the ankle. The break was bad, bone fragments visible through torn skin. Infection had already set in, red streaks radiating up his calf. "This will hurt," she told him, knowing he was beyond hearing. "But pain means life. Remember that." She braced his leg and pulled, feeling the bones grind and shift. His body convulsed. A soundless scream locked in his throat, but he didn't wake. Good. Consciousness would come when he was ready. She splinted the ankle with strips of yucca fiber and mesquite branches, binding it tight. Then she moved to his back, cleaning the whip wounds with water mixed with creosote bush. It would sting and burn, but it would fight the poison in his blood. She packed the deeper wounds with a paste made from ground prickly pear and sage, covering them with strips of deerskin. The brand on his shoulder made her pause. She traced the burned letter with one finger, feeling the rage beneath it. This mark had been made to claim him, to mark him as property, to reduce a human being to livestock. Her jaw tightened. She had seen what the white men did to her people, the treaties they broke, the land they stole, the children they kidnapped for their schools and churches. But slavery was different. It was a sickness of the soul made into law. She mixed a different paste for the brand, one that would ease pain, but also something more. Ground turquoise for healing, tobacco for offering, and her own blood, 3 drops from a thorn-pricked finger to bind her spirit to his work. As she applied it to the brand, his body jerked. His eyes snapped open. They were brown, almost black, and for a moment they held nothing but animal panic, the look of prey that knows the predator is close. Then they focused on her face, on her medicine bundle, on the strange reality of being alive. "Who?" His voice was a rasp, barely human. He tried to sit up and immediately collapsed, crying out as his broken ankle protested. "Don't move," Nalin said in Spanish, the trade language of the territory. "You are badly hurt. I am healing you." He stared at her, confusion and suspicion warring in his expression. Why? It was the question she had asked herself on the walk here. Why risk bringing trouble to her village? Why spend precious medicine on a stranger? Why follow a vision that her own grandmother had warned against? But she had learned to trust the visions. They had never led her wrong. "Because I saw you," she said simply. "The spirits showed me you were here. They told me you were meant to live." "The spirits," he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "The spirits let me be born into chains. Let me be sold 3 times before I could walk. Let me be beaten until I forgot my own name." His eyes burned with a fury that seemed to heat the air between them. "If your spirits wanted me to live, they have a cruel sense of mercy." Nalin held his gaze. "Perhaps mercy is not what they offer. Perhaps they offer something else." "What?" She reached into her medicine bundle and pulled out a small clay cup. Into it, she poured water, then added crushed herbs, yarrow for courage, tobacco for vision, and something else, a dark powder made from mushrooms that grew in the high mountains, mushrooms her people used only in the most sacred ceremonies. "Drink this," she said. "It will help with the pain, and it will show you why you survived." He looked at the cup, then at her. "How do I know it's not poison?" "You don't," she smiled slightly. "But you are already dying. What have you got to lose?" For a long moment he considered. Then, with shaking hands, he took the cup and drank. The mixture was bitter, strong enough to make him cough, but he drained it all, handing the empty cup back to her. "Now what?" he asked. "Now we wait for the medicine to work." And then she began gathering her supplies, preparing to move him. "Then I take you somewhere safe, somewhere you can heal." "There is no safe place for someone like me." His voice was hollow, resigned. "Not in this territory, not anywhere the white man's law reaches." "Then it is fortunate," Nalin said, shouldering her bundle, "that my people do not recognize the white man's law. We have our own." She knelt beside him again, this time placing both hands on his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating, stronger now, steadier. And beneath it, she felt what she had seen in her vision, that darkness, that rage, that potential for something terrible and necessary. "What is your name?" she asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. The herbs were beginning to work. She could see it in his eyes, the way they softened and dilated, the way his breathing deepened. "I don't remember," he finally said. "They took it, beat it out of me, called me boy and anything else they wanted." "Then you will need a new name, one that you choose. And what good is a name when you're property?" Nalin's grip on his chest tightened slightly. "You are not property, not anymore, not here." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to something between prayer and promise. "The desert does not recognize chains, the wind does not recognize masters, and I do not recognize any man's right to own another." His eyes widened slightly as the herbs took full effect. The pain in his face was easing, replaced by something else, awareness, clarity, and something that might have been hope, if hope hadn't been beaten out of him years ago. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I don't know. Try." She helped him to his feet, or tried to. His broken ankle couldn't bear weight, and his legs shook with weakness and fever. But there was strength in him still, core strength that had survived everything they'd done to him. With Nalin supporting his weight, he managed to stay upright. "My village is 7 miles north," she said. "Can you walk that far?" He looked at the distance, at the desert stretching endlessly under the merciless sun, at his own broken body. Then he looked at her, this strange woman with fierce eyes and gentle hands who had appeared like a vision in his dying moment. "I crawled 10 miles to get here," he said. "I can walk 7 more." They began to move, slowly, painfully. Nalin matched his limping pace, never rushing, never complaining about the weight. The sun beat down on them both, but she knew this desert, knew where to find shade, where the air moved cooler, where to rest without wasting time. As they walked, she told him about her people, the Chiricahua Apache, who had lived in these mountains and deserts for generations beyond counting. She told him about the sacred places, the springs and caves where spirits dwelled. She told him about the vision she'd had, 3 nights running, of a man lying in the sand, with darkness coiled around him like a snake. "The darkness," he said, his voice dreamy from the herbs. "I feel it sometimes, inside me, like anger but bigger, like it could burn down the world." "It could," Nalin agreed. "Rage that pure, pain that deep, it has power. My people understand this. We do not fear it. We teach it to dance." "Dance?" "Rage that explodes destroys the one who carries it. But rage that is focused, disciplined, directed..." She paused, looking up at a red hawk circling overhead. "That becomes something else. That becomes justice." They walked in silence after that, the only sounds their labored breathing and the whisper of wind through sage. The sun moved across the sky, and with it the shadows shifted and stretched. In the distance, the Sangre de Cristo mountains rose like broken teeth against the horizon, their peaks still holding snow, even in this heat. As evening approached, they reached a narrow canyon carved by ancient waters through red stone. Nalin led him into its depths, where the walls rose 50 feet on either side, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Petroglyphs marked the stone, spirals and handprints and figures that seemed to move in the fading light. "We are close," she said. "My village is just beyond this canyon." But as they emerged on the other side, she stopped abruptly. 3 men stood blocking their path. They were Apache, armed with bows and lances, their faces painted for war. The tallest one, a warrior named Goyakla, who Nalin had known since childhood, stepped forward. His expression was hard, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "Nalin," he said in their language, "what have you brought to our village?" She straightened, pulling herself to her full height, despite supporting the wounded man's weight. "I have brought someone who needs healing. He is not our people. He is a human being. That makes him our concern." Goyakla's eyes moved to the slave, taking in the scars, the brand, the broken body. "He will bring trouble. The slave hunters will come looking for him. Then they will find nothing but desert and death." Nalin's voice was cold as stone. "I have seen his path in the smoke and stars. It is woven with ours now. To turn him away would be to ignore the spirits." The warriors exchanged glances. Nalin's visions were respected, sometimes feared. But bringing an escaped slave to the village was dangerous in ways that went beyond spirit guidance. "The council will decide," Goyakla finally said. "But know this, if he brings soldiers to our home, if our children are harmed because of your mercy, it will be on your soul." "All things are on my soul," Nalin replied. "That is the burden of seeing." They walked past the warriors into the village proper, a collection of wickiups arranged in a loose circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the dust, while women worked and men tended weapons and tools. Faces turned to watch them pass, expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to outright hostility. Nalin brought him to her own dwelling, a sturdy wickiup covered in brush and hide, set slightly apart from the others. Inside, it was cool and dark, smelling of herbs and smoke. She helped him lie down on a pile of blankets and immediately began checking his wounds. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow we begin the real healing."
Did you know? Before the massive importation of African slaves, Native Americans were the first enslaved people in North America. Between the 1500s and early 1700s, thousands of indigenous people, particularly from tribes like the Wampanoag, Pequot, and Cherokee, were enslaved by European colonists. Many were sold to Caribbean plantations or forced into servitude in colonial homes. The practice was so extensive that some historians estimate tens of thousands of Native Americans were enslaved during this period, though exact numbers remain unknown due to poor record-keeping.
"What is real healing?" he asked, his voice already fading into exhausted sleep. Nalin looked at him in the firelight. This broken man she had pulled from death's door, this stranger the spirits had sent her. She thought about the darkness coiled inside him, about the rage that could burn down the world or reshape it. "Real healing," she said softly, "is not making the pain go away. It is teaching it to serve you instead of consuming you. It is taking what was done to you and transforming it into what you will do to them." But he was already asleep, his breathing deep, and even for the first time in who knew how long. Nalin sat beside him through the night, feeding the fire, mixing medicines, and thinking about the vision that had brought them together. In it, she had seen them standing side by side on a ridge overlooking a burning plantation. She had seen chains melting in flames. She had seen men who trafficked in flesh, learning what true fear meant. The vision had not shown her if they survived. It had only shown her that their work was necessary. Outside, the desert wind began to rise, carrying with it the smell of distant rain and the memory of blood soaked into sand. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, not a hunting call, but something else. A warning, perhaps, or a welcome. Nalin closed her eyes and prayed to the spirits that had guided her to this moment. She thanked them for the strength to act on vision, even when wisdom counseled hesitation. And she asked them for one thing more. Give him a reason to live beyond revenge. Give us both a path that leads somewhere other than death. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks upward into the smoke hole. In its shifting light, the shadows on the walls seemed to dance like warriors preparing for battle. 7 nights passed before the fever broke. Nalin spent every hour of those 7 nights beside him, leaving only to gather fresh water or prepare medicine. She fed him broth made from deer bones and wild onions, spooning it between cracked lips when he was too weak to swallow on his own. She changed the dressings on his wounds 3 times daily, watching for the red streaks of infection that meant death was still reaching for him. She sang healing songs her grandmother had taught her, songs in the old language that called to the spirits of mountain and sky. On the 3rd night, he spoke in his sleep. Not words exactly, more like sounds torn from some deep place where language couldn't reach. They were the sounds of suffering so profound it had become part of his bones. On the 5th night, he screamed. Nalin had been dozing when it happened, jerking awake to find him thrashing in the blankets, eyes wild and unseeing. She held him down with her body weight, speaking steadily in Apache and Spanish, trying to pull him back from wherever his mind had gone. "You are safe," she repeated. "You are here. You are healing." Eventually, the thrashing subsided. His eyes focused on her face, recognition flickering like a candle flame. "Where?" he managed to rasp. "Apache village. Chiricahua. You have been sick with fever." He closed his eyes. "Thought I died. Thought this was after." "Not yet." She released him, settling back on her heels. "Though you came close, your body was fighting 3 infections at once. Lesser men would have died. Maybe dying would have been easier." "Easier, yes. Better, no." She poured water into a clay cup and helped him drink. He was stronger now. She could feel it in the way he held himself, the way his hands no longer trembled quite so badly. The worst of the poison was leaving his body, carried away by herbs and prayer and his own stubborn will to survive. "The people here," he said after drinking his fill. "They don't want me here." Nalin didn't lie. "Some do not. They fear you will bring trouble." "They're right to fear that." His jaw tightened. "Men like me, we're worth money. They'll come looking. Let them come." Nalin's voice held an edge that made him look at her more carefully. "This is not their land, no matter what their papers say. This is Apache land. We do not recognize their treaties or their laws, and we do not surrender people to slave hunters. You say that now, but when they arrive with guns, we have guns too. And we know this desert in ways they never will." She met his eyes directly. "Besides, I did not pull you from death so that you could live in fear. The spirits showed me your purpose. It is not to hide." "What is it then?" Nalin was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "When I found you, I felt something inside you. A darkness, a rage so deep it has weight. Do you feel it?" He didn't answer immediately. His hand moved unconsciously to the brand on his shoulder, fingers tracing the burned letter. "I've felt it since I was a child," he finally said. "Since the first time I understood what I was, what they'd made me." His voice dropped lower. "I used to think it would kill me, that one day I'd just break, explode, take everyone around me into the darkness with me." "It might," Nalin agreed. "Uncontrolled rage destroys everything it touches, but rage that is focused, disciplined," she leaned forward, "that can change the world. You want to use me as a weapon. I want to help you become one. There is a difference." He studied her face in the firelight, trying to read truth from deception. "Why? What do you get from this?" It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. Nalin stood and walked to the entrance of the wickiup, pulling aside the hide covering to look out at the night. The moon was nearly full, painting the desert in silver and shadow. In the distance, she could see the glow of the other fires, hear the low murmur of conversation and the occasional bark of a dog. "When I was 12, she said, still facing away from him, "Spanish soldiers came to our village. They said they were looking for raiders who had stolen their cattle. My father told them we knew nothing of stolen cattle." They did not believe him. She paused, her hand tightening on the doorframe. They killed 5 of our men, took 7 children, including my younger brother, said they were going to civilize them, teach them to be Christians, beat the savage out of them. Her voice was steady, but something cold and sharp ran beneath it. My brother was 6 years old. He cried for our mother every night. I know this because one of the children escaped and told us. My brother died in their school from fever. They buried him in a Christian cemetery without telling us, without our ceremonies. His spirit is lost because of them. She turned back to face him. So when you ask what I get from this, the answer is justice, not just for you. For all of us who have been treated as less than human, for everyone they have taken, broken and tried to erase. The escaped slave was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, clearer. I don't remember my real name, he said, but the last place I was enslaved before I escaped was the Montoya Ranch. Mexican family who bought me in Texas. They called me all kinds of things, but the overseer, he used to call me Nero, and said it was the name of some Roman emperor who burned his city down. A grim smile touched his lips. Thought it was an insult. But I kept it. Felt right, somehow. Nero. Nalin tested the name. It sat heavy on her tongue, like a stone that could be thrown or a foundation that could be built. The man who burned Rome. Yes. That is a name with power. Power. Nero laughed, bitter and low. I don't feel powerful. I feel like something broken that can't be fixed. You are broken, Nalin agreed, returning to sit beside him. But broken things can still cut. Sometimes they cut deeper because of the breaking. She reached into her medicine bundle and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, she poured a handful of objects into her palm. Stones, dried herbs, a small carved figure, and something else. A piece of charcoal wrapped in red cloth. This is from a burned wickiup, she explained, holding up the charcoal. Not from a cooking fire. From a village the Mexican army destroyed 5 years ago. 23 people died. The survivors brought me this to hold in ceremony, to remember. She pressed the charcoal into Nero's hand, closing his fingers around it. Fire is transformation. It takes what is and makes it into something new. Wood becomes ash. Ash becomes soil. From soil grows new life. Her eyes held his. You have been burned, Nero, branded, scarred, broken by fire. But you are not ash. Not yet. You are still burning. And what you burn can be your choice. Nero stared at the charcoal in his hand. It left black marks on his palm, dark as the brand on his shoulder. What if I want to burn everything? He asked quietly. Then you burn everything. Nalin's answer was simple, direct. But burn with purpose. Burn what deserves burning, and leave something better in the ashes. Outside, footsteps approached. Nalin recognized the pattern, her grandmother's distinctive shuffle, accompanied by the tap of her walking stick. The old woman pushed through the door, covering without ceremony, her milky eyes somehow seeming to see everything despite their blindness. He is awake then, she said in Apache. Yes, grandmother. The old woman settled herself by the fire with a series of groans and complaints about her joints. She studied Nero with her blind gaze, her head tilted like a bird listening for prey underground. The darkness in him is strong, she said. Stronger than I have felt in many seasons. It frightens me, granddaughter. It should, Nalin replied. But fear is not always warning. Sometimes it is recognition. Recognition of what? Of something necessary. Nalin's grandmother was quiet for a moment, her gnarled fingers worrying at a strand of beads around her neck. The council met today. They discussed what to do with him. And Goyakla and the war party want him sent away. They say he will bring soldiers, that his presence endangers the village. Others are not sure. They wait to see what you say. What I say? Nalin raised an eyebrow. I am not a chief, not an elder. I have no voice in council. You are a medicine woman. You speak with spirits. Your visions have saved lives, warned of danger, guided us through hard times." The old woman leaned forward. "But this vision, granddaughter, are you certain it is from the spirits? Or is it from your own anger, your own desire for revenge?" It was the question Nalin had been asking herself for 7 nights. The question that kept her awake even when exhaustion pulled at her bones. "I don't know," she admitted. "Perhaps both. Does it matter? The spirits speak through our hearts as much as our dreams. My anger may be the tool they use to accomplish their purpose. Or your anger may be using the spirits as an excuse." Her grandmother's voice was gentle but firm. "I do not say this to discourage you, only to remind you, the path of vengeance is one that often leads to places we did not intend to go." Nalin knew her grandmother was right, but she also knew that doing nothing, letting injustice continue unchallenged, was its own kind of sin. "Will the council allow him to stay?" she asked. "For now, on the condition that he proves himself useful. That he does not bring danger to our people." The old woman rose stiffly. "And that you, granddaughter, take responsibility for whatever he becomes." After her grandmother left, Nalin and Nero sat in silence. The fire burned low, needing more wood. Outside, the sounds of the village settling into night filled the air. Children being called to bed, dogs barking at shadows, the rhythmic scrape of someone sharpening a blade. "What does she mean?" Nero asked. "About what I become?" Nalin added wood to the fire, watching sparks spiral upward. "She means that I have chosen to shape you, to take the raw material of your rage and your pain and forge it into something. A weapon, yes, but also a man who chooses his own path. And if I choose badly, then we both pay the price." She smiled slightly. "But I do not think you will. The spirits showed me standing beside you on a ridge, watching justice burn like the sunrise. I have learned to trust such visions, even when they scare you. Especially then." Nero shifted in his blankets, testing the strength in his healing body. The ankle was still splintered, but the swelling had gone down. The wounds on his back no longer wept. The fever was gone. He was far from whole, but he was far from dead. "How long until I can walk?" he asked. "Another week, perhaps 2. The bone must knit. And then? Then we begin your training." "Training for what?" Nalin looked at him across the fire, her expression serious. "Training to be what the desert needs. A storm that chooses its targets. A blade that cuts only those who deserve cutting." She paused. "My people have lived in these lands for generations beyond counting. We know how to survive, how to hunt, how to fight, how to move through country that kills others. I can teach you these things." "Why would you teach me? Why not just heal me and send me on my way?" "Because sending you on your way accomplishes nothing. You would die in the desert or be recaptured, or—" She trailed off. "The vision showed me something else. It showed me that together we could do what neither of us could do alone. Your rage and my knowledge, your strength and my guidance. 2 people becoming one force." "Like a weapon," Nero said. "Like justice," Nalin corrected. They talked deep into the night, Nalin explaining what she knew of the territory, where the plantations were, where the slave routes ran, which Mexican families dealt in human flesh, where the American traders established their posts. She told him about the underground network of people who helped escaped slaves, though it was fragile and incomplete in this territory. "The land itself is the best protection," she explained. "Know the water sources, know the hidden trails, know where the Apache are welcome and where we are hunted. This knowledge is power greater than any weapon." As the fire burned down to coals, Nero spoke. "There were others at the Montoya Ranch. 23 slaves last I counted. They're still there, still being worked like animals, beaten, branded. You want to go back for them?" It wasn't a question. "I got out. They didn't. That sits heavy on me." His hand moved to his chest, over his heart. If I'm going to be this weapon you want to forge, shouldn't it be used to free others? Nalin felt something shift inside her chest. Recognition, satisfaction, confirmation. This was what the spirits had wanted her to see. Not just a man seeking revenge, but a man seeking redemption through action. Yes, she said simply, but first you must be able to walk, to fight, to survive what is coming. The Montoya Ranch is 3 days' ride south. It is heavily guarded. Going back requires planning, preparation, and patience. I've been patient my whole life, Nero said bitterly. Patience gets you nothing but more suffering. Patient like a stone is patient, Nalin agreed. Waiting passively for the world to change. That is the patience of the powerless. But there is another kind of patience, the patience of the hunter who watches and waits for the perfect moment to strike. The patience of the seed that endures winter to bloom in spring. That is the patience of the powerful. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to something between promise and prayer. I will teach you to be patient like a hunter, like a storm gathering strength, and when you are ready, when we are ready, we will return to that ranch, and those 23 people will taste freedom. And the Montoyas? The Montoyas, Nalin said, will learn that some debts can only be paid in blood and ashes. Nero smiled for the first time since she'd found him. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally found purpose in a world that had tried to grind purpose out of him. When do we start? He asked. We already have, Nalin replied. From the moment I touched your chest in the desert and felt the darkness inside you, from the moment you chose to live instead of die, we have been starting since then. Now, we simply continue. She reached across the fire and placed her hand over his heart again, feeling it beat strong and steady. The darkness was still there, coiled and waiting, but now it had shape, direction, purpose. Sleep now, she said. Tomorrow the real work begins. Tomorrow I teach you to walk like an Apache, to see like an Apache, to fight like an Apache. And when you are ready, we will teach the slavers what it means to be hunted. Nero closed his eyes, his breathing evening out into sleep. But his hand remained on his chest over Nalin's, holding on to that connection like a man holding on to the only solid thing in a shifting world. Nalin kept her hand there until she was certain he was deeply asleep. Then she rose and stepped outside into the cool desert night. The moon was high and bright, turning the sand to silver. In the distance, coyotes sang their ancient songs. She thought about the path she had set them both on, about the violence it would require, the blood it would spill, the lives it might cost. Her grandmother was right to worry. This was a dangerous game, playing with forces as old and wild as the desert itself. But as she looked up at the stars, the same stars that had guided her people for generations, the same stars that had watched empires rise and fall, she felt certain of one thing. The earth remembered every wound, and it was time to start collecting the debts. The moon waxed and waned twice before Nero could walk without the crutch Nalin had fashioned from juniper wood. His ankle remained weak, prone to swelling if he pushed too hard, but the bone had healed straight and true. The scars on his back would never fade, but the wounds no longer wet. The brand on his shoulder had become just another mark on a body that was more scar tissue than smooth skin. But it was the changes inside him that mattered most. Every morning, before the sun cleared the eastern mountains, Nalin woke him. They would walk into the desert together, always moving in a different direction, always teaching him something new. She showed him how to read the land, where water hid beneath the surface, which plants held moisture, which could heal and which could kill. She taught him the language of tracks, how to tell the age of a print by the sharpness of its edges, how to distinguish the passage of one animal from another. The desert tells stories to those who learn to listen, she explained one morning as they crouched beside a series of tracks in the sand. These are from a mule deer, a doe. She passed here yesterday evening moving slow. See how deep the prints? She is pregnant, carrying extra weight, and here she pointed to smaller tracks crossing the deer's path. A coyote following her scent, but he abandoned the hunt. See how the tracks veer away? He smelled something that frightened him more than hunger drove him. What? Us? Nalin smiled. Or rather, the memory of us. Apache hunt this area regularly. The coyotes have learned to be wary. She taught him to move silently, to place his feet with intention, to become part of the landscape rather than moving through it. At first, Nero crashed through the brush like a wounded animal, snapping twigs and dislodging stones. But gradually, as his body healed and his awareness sharpened, he learned the art of invisibility. Your people's way of moving through the world, Nalin explained during one lesson, is to dominate it, to clear paths, build roads, announce your presence. This is the way of those who have numbers and weapons and the arrogance to believe they own what they stand on. She gestured to the empty desert around them, to the subtle trails only visible if you knew how to look. Our way is different. We do not announce, we do not dominate, we become part of what already exists. The wind does not fight the rock, it flows around it. The water does not argue with the canyon, it carves its path grain by grain over generations. This is how you must learn to be, not fighting the world, but becoming so much a part of it that others cannot see you until you choose to be seen. In the afternoons, when the heat became too fierce even for lesson, they would return to the village. While Nero rested in the shade, Nalin would work, grinding herbs, mixing medicines, tending to others who needed healing. The village had slowly, grudgingly, begun to accept his presence. Children stared but no longer ran away. Women nodded to him in passing. Men still watched with wary eyes, but they no longer reached for weapons when he approached. One afternoon, Goyakla approached the wickiup where Nero sat repairing a torn blanket. The warrior's face was painted with white clay and red ochre. He had been on a raid against Mexican ranchers who had been encroaching on Apache hunting grounds. "The medicine woman teaches you our ways," Goyakla said without preamble. It was not quite a question, not quite an accusation. "She does," Nero replied carefully. He had learned enough Apache to understand the basics, though he still struggled with the complex verb forms. "Why?" "Because I asked her to. Because I want to be useful," Goyakla snorted. "Useful? You are still weak. Your ankle is barely healed. In a real fight, you would be a burden." "Then teach me not to be." The words hung in the air between them. Goyakla's eyes narrowed, reassessing. "You want to learn to fight. I want to learn to survive, to be strong enough that no one can ever chain me again." Nero met the warrior's gaze directly. "And yes, I want to learn to fight, to make the people who hurt me pay for what they did. Revenge is a poor teacher." "Then what's a good one?" Goyakla considered this. Behind him, other warriors were returning from the raid, carrying supplies taken from the Mexican ranchers, food, blankets, a few rifles. They called out greetings to him, joked about his kills, celebrated their success. "Duty," Goyakla finally said. "Purpose. Understanding that you fight not for yourself alone, but for something larger." He paused. "Nalin's brother was taken by the Spanish. Did she tell you this?" "She did." "And did she tell you what happened to him?" "He died in their school." "Yes, but before that," Goyakla's expression darkened. "Before that, they tried to beat our language out of him, our customs, our gods. They tried to make him into something he was not. He resisted. They beat him harder, and when he still resisted, they locked him in a room without food or water until he learned to pray their way." The warrior's hand tightened on his lance. He was 6 years old. He died praying to Jesus, calling for his mother in Spanish, because they had beaten the Apache out of him. When Nalin learned this, she did not eat for 7 days. She sat in the desert and spoke with the spirits. When she returned, she was changed. The girl who laughed and played was gone. In her place was the medicine woman you know, powerful, dangerous, walking between worlds. Goyakla looked at Nero directly. She sees her brother in you, another person broken by the white man's world. She thinks she can save you where she could not save him, but be warned. If you betray that trust, if you bring harm to this village through carelessness or cowardice, I will kill you myself, slowly. Do you understand? I understand, Nero said, and I give you my word. I will die before I let harm come to these people through my actions. Words are wind. Show me through deeds. The next morning, Goyakla appeared before dawn with a lance in hand. He threw it at Nero's feet. If you want to learn to fight, he said, then fight. For the next month, Nero's real education began. Goyakla was a brutal teacher, showing no mercy for weakness or hesitation. He drilled Nero in the use of the lance, the bow, the knife, and bare hands. He taught him that Apache fighting was not about brute strength, but about speed, deception, and striking from unexpected angles. You are not a bear, Goyakla said after knocking Nero flat for the third time in as many minutes. Bears fight with power, meeting force with force. You are a coyote. Coyotes survive by being clever, by attacking when the enemy is distracted, by knowing when to fight and when to flee. He pulled Nero to his feet and immediately swept his legs again, dropping him back into the dust. And coyotes never, ever fight fair. Nalin watched these lessons from a distance, pleased to see Nero growing stronger, faster, more confident. But she also saw something else, the way the darkness inside him was being given shape and direction. The rage was still there, coiled tight in his chest, but now it had discipline. Now it had focus. One evening, after a particularly hard day of training, Nalin brought him a special tea made from herbs that eased muscle pain. They sat together outside her wickiup, watching the sun set over the western mesas. "You are doing well," she said. "Goyakla told me you landed a strike on him today. First one to do so in years." Nero smiled slightly, touching his ribs where the warrior's counterstrike had landed. "He made me pay for it." "Of course. That is how you learn." She poured the tea, handing him a cup. "But you are learning. In another month, you will be ready." "Ready for what?" Nalin looked at him, her expression serious. "Ready to go back, to the Montoya ranch, to free the ones you left behind." Nero's hand tightened on the cup. "You mean it?" "I do not say things I do not mean." She pulled a rolled hide from inside her tunic and spread it on the ground between them. On it was drawn a crude map, the river systems, the mountains, the trails, and in the center a collection of buildings marked with an X. "I have been gathering information," Nalin explained, "talking to traders, asking questions of those who pass through our territory. The Montoya ranch is here, along the Rio Grande. 23 slaves, as you said. 12 men, 8 women, 3 children. They are guarded by 6 armed overseers, and Montoya himself keeps a house on the property with his family." She pointed to various features on the map. "The slaves sleep in 2 barracks here and here. The overseers rotate watches, but they are lazy, complacent. They do not expect trouble this far from the main slave routes. The nearest military outpost is 2 days' ride north. By the time soldiers arrived, we would be long gone." "We?" Nero looked at her. "You're coming with me? Did you think I would send you alone?" Nalin's expression was almost amused. "This is my path as much as yours. The spirit showed me standing beside you, remember? And besides," her voice hardened, "I have my own debts to collect from people like the Montoyas. This is dangerous. People could die. People are already dying." Nalin rolled up the map. "Those slaves you left behind, how many will survive another year, another month? How many more will be branded, beaten, broken like you were?" She met his eyes. "The only question that matters is whether we are strong enough to change their fate, and I believe we are." Nero was quiet for a long moment, staring into the darkening desert. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "I've been having dreams," he said. "Every night since you found me. In them, I'm standing in front of the slave barracks, and I'm opening the doors. The chains fall off on their own, like they were never really there. And everyone inside walks out free, but they're not running away. They're walking toward something, toward a future, I guess, one they choose." "That is a good dream," Nalin said. "Let us make it real." They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Nalin taught Nero the locations of water sources along the route south, the hidden camps where they could rest unseen, the places to avoid where Mexican patrols were common. Goyakla, once he learned of the plan, volunteered to join them with 3 other warriors. "Not for you," he told Nero bluntly. "For Nalin. If she is determined to do this, she should not go with only one fighter, however much training you have received." But 2 days before they were to leave, Nalin's grandmother fell ill. It came on suddenly, a fever and cough that rattled in her chest like stones in a gourd. Nalin spent 2 days and nights at her bedside, mixing medicines, performing ceremonies, calling on every skill she possessed. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. The old woman opened her eyes and beckoned Nalin close. "You are determined to do this thing," she whispered. "I am, grandmother. Even knowing it may lead to your death?" "Even knowing that." The old woman sighed, reaching up to touch Nalin's face. "Then I will tell you what I have not told you before. When I was young, before you were born, I too had a vision. In it, I saw a great fire consuming the desert. I saw it burn everything, the plantations, the missions, the forts, all the structures of the white man's world. And I saw it started by 2 people walking side by side. One was Apache, one was not." Her milky eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the physical world. "I thought the vision was a warning, that I should prevent this fire. But now, at the end of my life, I understand. It was not a warning. It was a promise. The fire is coming whether we light it or not. The only question is whether it burns controlled or wild." She squeezed Nalin's hand. "You and this man you have healed. You are the 2 from my vision. The fire you start will change everything. Whether that change is good or evil, I do not know. Perhaps both. But it is necessary." "This I believe." Nalin felt tears prick her eyes. "I am frightened, grandmother." "Good. Only fools walk into fire without fear." The old woman smiled. "But sometimes fire is the only thing that cleanses. Sometimes the old world must burn before a new one can grow." That night, Nalin told Nero about her grandmother's vision. They sat by the fire, making final preparations for the journey. "A fire that burns everything," Nero repeated. "Is that what we're starting?" "I don't know," Nalin admitted. "But I know that doing nothing allows evil to continue unchecked. Every day those people remain in chains is another day of suffering. Every plantation that operates unpunished is another example of injustice accepted as normal." She looked at him. "If stopping that requires fire, then yes, we will start a fire and let the desert decide what deserves to burn." Nero nodded slowly. "I'm ready." "Are you?" Nalin studied his face in the firelight. "Because once we begin this path, there is no turning back. Once we free those slaves, once we strike against the Montoyas, we become something new. Outlaws, enemies of every authority in the territory. We will be hunted for the rest of our lives." "I've been hunted my whole life," Nero said quietly. "At least this way, I get to choose why." They left before dawn the next day. Nalin, Nero, Goyakla, and 3 other warriors, 6 people on 5 horses, moving south through country that most men avoided. They traveled by night when possible, resting during the fierce heat of day in whatever shade they could find. They saw no one. The land here was too harsh for casual travelers, too dangerous for anyone without knowledge of water sources and safe passage. On the 3rd night, they crested a ridge and looked down at the Montoya ranch spread along the river below. Even from this distance they could see the barracks, the main house, the corrals and fields. Lamplight glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and in the barracks 23 people lay down to sleep in chains, not knowing that their world was about to change. "Tomorrow night," Nalin said softly. "We strike tomorrow night." Nero stared down at the ranch, his hand unconsciously moving to the brand on his shoulder. The darkness inside him pulsed like a second heartbeat, eager, hungry, ready to be unleashed. "Tomorrow night," he agreed. And in the darkness behind them, unseen and unheard, the desert wind began to rise. The day before the raid, they waited in a box canyon 3 miles north of the Montoya Ranch, sheltered from view by towering walls of red stone. The heat was suffocating even in shadow, the air thick enough to chew. No one spoke much. They were saving their energy, saving their words for when they mattered. Nero sat apart from the others, checking and rechecking his weapons. A lance Goyakla had given him, a knife with a blade made from traded steel, and a bow strung with sinew. His hands moved with practiced efficiency now, no longer the clumsy grip of a man unused to tools of war. Nalin had taught him well. They both had. But it wasn't the weapons that made him ready. It was something deeper. A cold clarity that had settled over him like frost on stone. The rage was still there, coiled tight in his chest, but it no longer controlled him. He controlled it, and tonight he would unleash it with purpose. Nalin approached as the sun reached its apex, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. She settled beside him without a word, unfolding the fabric to reveal a collection of items: face paint made from white clay and charcoal, a leather band decorated with eagle feathers, and something else: a shirt made from deerskin, dyed dark, and decorated with symbols she had painted herself. "For tonight," she said simply, handing him the shirt. Nero took it carefully, feeling the weight of it, the craft that had gone into its making. The symbols were ones she had been teaching him: spirals for the journey, broken chains for freedom, and something else. A figure with arms raised, half human, half shadow. "What is this one?" he asked, pointing to it. "It is you," Nalin said, "or what you are becoming, a man standing between two worlds, the one that broke you and the one you are building. The shadow is your rage, the human is your choice. Together, they make something new." She began to mix the face paint with water from her canteen. "In Apache tradition, we paint ourselves before battle. It is not decoration, it is transformation. We put on the paint to remind ourselves that we are more than just flesh and blood. We are spirits wearing skin, and tonight we must be the spirits that these people fear." She dipped her fingers in the white clay and began to paint Nero's face. Broad stripes across his forehead, down his cheeks, along his jaw. Then came the charcoal, filling the spaces between, creating a pattern of light and dark, order and chaos. "The white is for clarity of purpose," she explained as she worked. "To see clearly what must be done. The black is for the shadow you carry, the rage that will fuel your actions. Together they show that you are balanced, that your violence serves justice rather than blind anger." No, when she finished with his face, she picked up the leather band and tied it around his head, the eagle feathers hanging just behind his right ear. "The eagle sees everything from above," she said. "It reminds you to maintain perspective, to think clearly even in chaos. You are not just fighting for revenge tonight, Nero. You are fighting for freedom. For those 23 people who sleep in chains, remember that when the violence begins." Nero looked down at his painted hands, at the weapons laid out before him, at the shirt decorated with symbols of transformation. He felt different somehow, not just physically stronger than the broken man Nalin had found in the desert, but fundamentally changed, as if he had shed an old skin and grown a new one, tougher and more dangerous. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you become tonight?" Nalin smiled, a sharp expression that held no humor. "I become what I have always been." A medicine woman who knows that sometimes healing requires cutting out the infection. She picked up her own weapons, a bow and a knife with a handle wrapped in red cloth. My grandmother told me once that there are two kinds of healers: those who preserve life at all costs, and those who understand that some things must die so that others may live. Tonight, I am the second kind. As evening approached, they reviewed the plan one final time. Goyakla spread the hide map on the ground, and they all gathered around. The guards rotate every 4 hours, Goyakla explained, pointing to positions marked on the map. 2 on the perimeter, walking opposite patterns, 1 at the main house, 1 at the overseer's quarters, 2 sleeping, off duty. They are lazy, complacent. They do not expect attack this far from the main trade routes. He looked up at the group. Nalin and Nero will approach from the east, using the river for cover. Their task is to reach the slave barracks and get the people out quietly. My warriors and I will handle the guards. Our goal is speed and silence. Get in, free the slaves, get out before anyone can raise an alarm or summon help. And if they do raise an alarm? One of the warriors asked. Goyakla's expression was cold. Then we make sure no one lives to spread word of who did this. The Montoyas must not know it was Apache. If they believe it was a slave uprising, an internal affair, they will not bring soldiers into our territory. Nalin spoke up. What about the family? Montoya's wife and children are in the main house. We do not harm women and children, Goyakla said firmly. That is not our way, but we do not go out of our way to save them either. If they stay inside, they live. If they interfere... He left the sentence unfinished. Nero felt a cold knot in his stomach. He understood the necessity of violence, had spent weeks training for it, but the thought of children caught in the crossfire made him hesitate. Nalin placed a hand on his arm, reading his expression. The Montoya children sleep in safety while slave children sleep in chains, she said quietly. Their comfort is built on suffering. Remember that. I know, Nero said, but they're still children. They didn't choose this. No one chooses the circumstances of their birth. Nalin's voice was hard. But we all choose what we do with the power we inherit. Those children will grow up to run this ranch, to continue their father's trade in human flesh, unless something changes. Tonight, we change it. As darkness fell, they prepared in silence. Weapons were checked one final time. Water skins were filled. Faces were painted. Prayers were spoken to spirits of mountain and desert, asking for strength, for courage, for justice. Nero pulled on the shirt Nalin had made for him, feeling the soft deerskin against his scarred back. The eagle feather in his hair stirred in the evening breeze. He looked at his reflection in a still pool of water and barely recognized the man staring back. Painted for war, armed and dangerous, transformed from broken slave into something else entirely. "It is time," Goyakla announced as the moon rose full and bright. They mounted their horses and rode south in silence, moving like shadows across the desert floor. The night was clear, the sky so full of stars it seemed like holes punched in dark fabric to reveal the light beyond. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Another answered, a conversation in a language older than any human speech. When they reached the ridge overlooking the ranch, they dismounted and proceeded on foot. Below, the buildings were dark except for lanterns hung at intervals around the property. Nero could see one guard making his rounds, moving slowly, bored, a rifle slung carelessly over his shoulder. Goyakla assigned positions with hand signals. 2 warriors would take the walking guards. 1 would watch the overseer's quarters. Goyakla himself would position near the main house to prevent anyone from escaping to raise an alarm.
Did you know? During the 1850s-1880s, Apache warriors, particularly under leaders like Geronimo and Victorio, frequently raided ranches, plantations, and settlements across the southwest borderlands. Historical records document instances where Apache raiders would free enslaved African Americans during these attacks, sometimes integrating them into their bands. The Apache, who themselves were victims of Spanish and later American slave raids, particularly targeting their children, saw a common cause with escaped slaves. Some freed black individuals chose to remain with Apache groups, learning their ways and fighting alongside them against U.S. and Mexican forces. Mexican and American authorities were particularly concerned about these alliances as they undermined the slave system and created experienced, motivated fighters who knew both Apache guerrilla tactics and the vulnerabilities of settler communities. This cross-cultural resistance represented one of the most feared threats to the expansion of slavery into the Western territories.
That left Nalin and Nero to approach the slave barracks. They moved down the ridge like water flowing, silent and inexorable. The moon cast everything in silver and shadow, sharp enough to cut. Nero's heart hammered in his chest, but his hands were steady, his mind clear. The rage that had churned inside him for so long had crystallized into cold purpose. They reached the river and waded into it, using the water to mask their approach and cool their heated bodies. The current was gentle here, barely moving. Across the water, no more than 100 yards away, were the barracks where 23 people slept in chains, where he had slept before his escape. Nalin touched his shoulder, pointed. The eastern barracks first, where the men were kept. They would wake them, free them, arm them if possible, then move to the women and children. Speed was everything. Surprise was everything. They climbed out of the water on the ranch side, clothes dripping, weapons dry and ready. Ahead, one of Goyakla's warriors had already taken down a guard. Nero could see the body being dragged into shadows, no sound of struggle, no alarm raised. They reached the barracks door. It was locked with a heavy padlock, rusted but sturdy. Nero gripped it, testing its strength, then looked at Nalin. She nodded and pulled out a piece of metal she'd fashioned for this purpose, a pick made from a nail traded from a Mexican blacksmith. But before she could begin working on the lock, the door to the overseer's quarters opened. A man stepped out, scratching himself, carrying a lantern. He was headed toward the outhouse, not looking, not expecting anything wrong. But his path would take him directly past the barracks, directly past them. Nero and Nalin pressed against the wall, hidden in shadow. The overseer moved closer, closer. Nero could hear him humming some tuneless song, could smell tobacco and whiskey on him even from 15 feet away, 10 feet, 5. The overseer stopped directly in front of them, still not seeing them in the darkness. He set down his lantern, began to unbutton his trousers. Nero moved without thinking. Muscle memory from weeks of training with Goyakla took over. He was behind the man in 2 silent steps, knife in hand, the blade finding the soft spot between ribs and spine with practiced precision. His other hand covered the overseer's mouth, muffling any sound. The man stiffened, jerked once and went limp. Nero lowered him to the ground, hands shaking now, mind catching up to what his body had just done. He had killed before, in self-defense during his escape, a guard who had tried to stop him. But that had been desperate, frantic, instinctive. This was different. This was deliberate, calculated, cold. He looked at his hands, at the blood on them, and felt the darkness inside him pulse with satisfaction. Nalin appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, just retrieved the lantern, lowered its flame to the barest ember, and returned to the lock. This time no one interrupted her work. The lock opened with a soft click. Nero pulled the door open slowly, wincing at the slight creak of hinges. Inside, the barracks smelled of unwashed bodies, suffering and despair. 12 men lay on rough bunks, ankles chained to iron rings, bolted into the floor. Most were sleeping. A few stirred at the sound of the door. One man, nearest the entrance, opened his eyes. Recognition flickered across his face. "Nero?" he whispered, disbelief and hope warring in his voice. "That you?" "It's me, Solomon." Nero stepped inside, keeping his voice low. "I came back. I came to get you out." Solomon sat up as much as his chains would allow. He was thin, too thin, his ribs visible through his skin. One eye was swollen shut from a recent beating, but there was strength in him still, a core that hadn't broken despite everything. You came back, Solomon repeated, as if testing the reality of it. You actually came back. I told you I would. Nero knelt beside him, examining the chain. Where do they keep the keys? Overseer has them on his belt. The one that Solomon's words cut off as he saw the body outside the door. Oh, you already handled that. We move fast and quiet, Nalin said, entering the barracks. Wake the others. Tell them to stay silent, or we all die here tonight. Solomon began waking the other men, while Nero retrieved the keys from the dead overseer's belt. As each man woke, the same expression crossed their faces. Shock, hope, barely dared belief that this might be real. One by one, Nero unlocked their chains. The sound of iron falling away was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Can you fight? He asked them. We need to get to the other barracks, free the women and children, but there are still guards active, and we might need... We can fight, Solomon said, standing on shaky legs. Give us weapons and point us at the bastards who did this to us. We'll show you what we can do. The men armed themselves with tools from the barracks. Shovels, picks, anything that could be turned into a weapon. They moved with the desperation of people who knew this might be their only chance at freedom. Outside, another guard had been taken down by Goyakla's warriors. The ranch was still mostly quiet, the main house dark, no alarm raised. But time was running short. Dawn was still hours away, but every minute increased the chance of discovery. They moved to the second barracks, repeating the process. 8 women, 3 children. The youngest child couldn't have been more than 4 years old. When Nero freed her mother's chains, the woman clutched her daughter and wept silently, shoulders shaking with emotions too big for sound. We have them all, Nalin said to Nero. Now we run. But as they turned to leave, a lantern sparked to life in the main house. A window opened, and Montoya himself leaned out, rubbing sleep from his eyes, wondering at the commotion below. For one frozen moment, their eyes met across the dark yard. Then Montoya screamed, Intrusos! Nos están robando los esclavos! The raid erupted into chaos. Lights blazed in every building. The remaining guards stumbled out, half-dressed but armed. From the overseer's quarters, men poured out carrying rifles and pistols. Goyakla's warriors engaged immediately, arrows flying through the darkness, finding targets with lethal accuracy. Run! Nero shouted to the freed slaves. To the river! Get across and keep running north. Don't stop for anything. The slaves scattered, some moving fast despite their weakened state, others slower, hampered by injury or youth or the simple disbelief that freedom was actually possible. Nero and Nalin covered their escape, he with his lance and she with her bow, both of them moving through the chaos with deadly purpose. A guard appeared from the shadows raising a rifle. Nero's lance found his throat before he could pull the trigger. Another guard fell with one of Nalin's arrows through his chest. The air filled with gunshots, screams, the sound of wood splintering and glass breaking. Solomon and several of the freedmen had armed themselves with fallen guards' weapons and were fighting back with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. One overseer went down beneath their improvised clubs. Another fled toward the main house, only to be stopped by Goyakla's warriors. Through it all, Nero kept moving, kept fighting, the darkness inside him fully unleashed. He was a storm given human form, rage refined into purpose, every strike landing with the weight of years of suffering. This was what Nalin had promised. His pain transformed into their weapon, and it was terrible and beautiful and necessary. He saw her across the yard, her face painted for war, her bow singing as arrow after arrow found its mark. She was magnificent, fierce and deadly, and utterly committed to this path they had chosen together. Then he saw Montoya himself emerge from the main house, carrying a shotgun. The rancher's face was twisted with rage and fear as he surveyed the chaos. His property destroying itself, his slaves escaping, his guards falling. Their eyes met again, And in that moment, Nero saw recognition. Montoya remembered him, remembered the slave who had escaped months ago, remembered the beating he had ordered, the brand he had applied. Montoya raised the shotgun, aiming directly at Nero's chest. Time seemed to slow. Nero saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel leveled at his heart, saw his own death approaching with inevitability of sunrise. Then Nalin was there, moving faster than thought, her body between Nero and the gun. The shotgun roared. She stumbled, fell, blood blooming across her shoulder like a terrible flower. No! Nero's scream was torn from somewhere primal, somewhere beyond language. He launched himself at Montoya with all the fury he had been storing for a lifetime. They collided hard, both going down in the dust. The shotgun skittered away. Montoya tried to reach for it, but Nero was faster, stronger, fueled by rage, so pure it gave him strength beyond what his body should possess. His hands found Montoya's throat. He squeezed. "You branded me," Nero growled, his voice barely human. "You beat me. You tried to break me, but I'm still here, and you—" He squeezed harder. "You're done." Montoya's face turned purple, his hands clawing uselessly at Nero's grip. His eyes bulged, terror and disbelief written across his features. This couldn't be happening. Slaves didn't fight back. Property didn't rebel. The natural order of things. His eyes went empty. His body went limp. Nero held on for several seconds longer, making sure. Then he released Montoya's corpse and turned to find Nalin. She was sitting against the barracks wall, one hand pressed to her shoulder where the shotgun blast had caught her. Blood seeped between her fingers, dark and glistening in the firelight. Her face was pale but calm, her eyes clear. "I'm all right," she said before he could speak. "The shot scattered. Painful, but not fatal. You took a bullet for me." "I took a bullet to ensure our success." She winced as Goyakla appeared beside them, quickly examining the wound. "If you had died, this whole thing would have been meaningless. The freed slaves need someone who understands what they've endured, someone who can lead them to safety." "The slaves are across the river," Goyakla reported, "all 23, heading north as instructed. My warriors are covering their escape. We have killed all the guards and overseers, but we must go now. Before anyone from the surrounding ranches hears the commotion and comes to investigate." He helped Nalin to her feet. She was unsteady but determined, refusing to show weakness. As they moved toward the river, Nero looked back at the ranch one last time. Bodies lay scattered in the dust. Buildings burned where lanterns had been knocked over in the fighting. The main house stood dark and silent. Montoya's family still inside, alive but forever changed. This was what they had done. This was what justice looked like when it came for those who traded in human flesh. And as they crossed the river and disappeared into the desert night, following the path of the freed slaves, Nero felt the darkness inside him settle. Not gone, never gone, but satisfied for now, purposeful. Behind them, the desert wind rose, carrying the smell of smoke and freedom across the empty land. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. And somewhere in the darkness, 23 people ran toward a future they would choose themselves. The storm had come, and the desert would remember. They traveled through the night and into the next day, moving north through country so harsh even the Mexican authorities rarely patrolled it. The freed slaves struggled to keep pace, weakened by years of forced labor and inadequate food, but they pushed forward with the desperation of people who knew capture meant death, or worse. Nalin rode in silence, one hand pressed to her wounded shoulder. Goyakla had packed the wound with herbs and bound it tight, but she had lost blood, and the pain was constant. Still, she refused to slow down or show weakness. Her face remained set in grim determination, eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. Nero rode beside her, watching her carefully. Every time she swayed in the saddle, his heart clenched. She had taken that bullet for him, had stepped between him and death without hesitation. That kind of sacrifice created a debt that could never be fully repaid, but it also created something else, a bond forged in blood and fire, deeper than friendship, stronger than alliance. They had walked through violence together and emerged changed. The medicine woman and the freed slave, two people becoming one purpose. By noon the next day they reached a box canyon Nalin knew, one with a hidden spring and caves where they could rest unseen. The freed slaves collapsed in the shade, too exhausted to celebrate their freedom, too traumatized to fully believe it was real. Solomon found Nero sitting apart from the others, staring south toward the ranch they had left behind. "Never thought I'd see you again," Solomon said, settling beside him. "When you escaped, we all figured you were dead within a week. Desert doesn't forgive mistakes." "Almost was dead," Nero admitted. "She found me." He nodded toward Nalin, who was tending to the youngest child, checking for injuries, offering water and soft words. "Pulled me back from the edge, healed me, taught me. Taught you to do what you did last night." Solomon's voice held respect and a hint of fear. "That wasn't just fighting, brother. That was something else, something—" He struggled for the word. "Necessary," Nero finished. "That's what she calls it. Necessary violence. Taking the rage they built in us and using it against them." Solomon was quiet for a moment. "I felt it too last night, when I had that overseer's club in my hands. All those years of being beaten, being treated like livestock, being told I was nothing. It all came out at once. I wanted to kill every one of them, would have if there'd been more time." "Is that wrong?" Nero asked. "To want revenge?" "Don't know if it's wrong or right. Just know it felt good in the moment." "And that scares me more than anything else that happened." Nalin approached, moving stiffly. Her shoulder was clearly paining her, but her expression remained calm. She settled beside them, accepting a water skin from Solomon. "You are all wondering what happens now," she said without preamble. "Where you go, what you do, whether you are truly free or just escaped." Solomon nodded. "We're grateful for what you did, what you both did. But she's right. 23 escaped slaves. Most of us barely able to stand, in the middle of hostile territory. We won't last long out here." "No," Nalin agreed. "You won't. Not without help, without guidance, without a plan." She looked at Nero. "Tell them what you told me, about your dream." Nero shifted uncomfortably, not used to speaking to groups, but he saw the faces turn toward him, exhausted, scared, hopeful, and found his voice. "Before we raided the ranch, I had a dream," he began. "I was opening the barracks doors, and the chains were falling off on their own. Everyone was walking out free, but they weren't running away. They were walking towards something, a future they chose." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I don't know what that future looks like exactly, but I know it can't be running forever, always afraid, always looking over our shoulders. We need somewhere safe, somewhere we can build something, somewhere we can be more than just escaped slaves." "There's no place like that," one of the women said. Her name was Esther, and she had a long scar across her cheek from where an overseer had hit her with a branding iron. "Not for people like us. Not in this territory. Not anywhere the law reaches." "Then we go where the law doesn't reach," Nalin said. "There are places in these mountains and deserts where neither Mexican nor American authority extends. Places where Apache have lived for generations, moving freely, answering to no government except our own." She looked around at the assembled group. "My people do not practice slavery. We do not recognize the white man's claim to own other human beings. If you come with us, you will be under our protection." "In exchange for what?" Solomon asked pragmatically. "Nothing's free in this world." "In exchange for living by our rules, contributing to our community, learning our ways of survival." Nalin's voice was firm, but not unkind. "We are not saviors offering charity. We are people offering alliance. You work, you learn, you become part of something larger than yourselves." In return, you receive protection, knowledge, and a place to belong. And if we don't want that, Esther asked, if we want to try for the north, for the territories where slavery is illegal, then you are free to try. Nalin gestured to the vast desert surrounding them. I will give you directions to water sources, to safe paths, to people who might help you. But know this, the journey north is long, dangerous, and heavily patrolled. Most who attempt it do not survive. Those who do often find that freedom on paper does not mean freedom in practice. She let that truth sink in before continuing. What we offer is different. Not easier, but different. The Apache way is harsh, demanding, unforgiving of weakness, but it is honest. We do not pretend to offer paradise. We offer survival, dignity, and the chance to forge your own path. The freed slaves looked at each other, silent conversations happening in glances and slight gestures. Finally, Solomon spoke. I'll stay, he said. Try this Apache way. Can't be worse than what we left behind. One by one, the others agreed. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but all of them recognizing that this strange alliance offered their best chance at a future. Only one person dissented, a young man named Thomas, who had been at the ranch less than a year, sold south from a plantation in Louisiana. He stood apart from the group, his expression stubborn. I'm going north, he announced. I have family in Illinois, free family. I'm going to find them. The journey will kill you, Goyakla said flatly. He had been listening from nearby, his warriors spread out around the camp as sentries. You do not know the land, do not speak the languages, have no weapons, no resources. You will die of thirst, or be recaptured, or be killed by opportunists who prey on desperate travelers. Maybe, Thomas said, but it's my choice to make. That's what freedom means, right? Making your own choices, even stupid ones? Nalin studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Yes. That is exactly what it means. She rose, moving to her pack, and pulled out a small bundle. Take this. Dried meat, directions to the nearest water sources, and a knife. It is all I can spare. The rest is up to you, and whatever gods you pray to. Thomas accepted the bundle, his expression softening slightly. Thank you for everything, for coming back for us, for giving us a choice. He looked at Nero. You're a free man now, brother. Don't forget what that cost. After Thomas departed, heading north alone, the mood in the camp shifted. The remaining freed slaves, now 22, began to truly accept their new reality. They were not going back. They were not going to be recaptured. They were free, and they had chosen a path forward. Over the following days, as Nalin's shoulder slowly healed, the group began its transformation. Goyakla and his warriors taught the former slaves basic survival skills. How to find water in the desert, which plants were safe to eat, how to move quietly, how to track and hunt. It was difficult, humbling work for people who had spent years being told they were incapable of thinking for themselves. But they learned. They had to. Survival demanded it. Nalin worked with the women, teaching them to prepare hides, to make useful tools from available materials, to understand the medicinal properties of desert plants. She discovered that several of them had valuable skills. Esther could sew with remarkable precision. Another woman named Ruth knew herbs from her time on a plantation in Mississippi. A third had been a cook and could make food stretch further than seemed possible. Slavery tried to strip away everything that made you valuable, Nalin told them one evening as they worked. But you retained these skills, kept them alive inside despite everything. That is power. That is resistance. Never forget that. Nero found himself in a strange position, neither fully Apache nor fully one of the freed slaves, but something in between. A bridge connecting two worlds, two peoples, two ways of being. The freed slaves looked to him for understanding and guidance, seeing in him someone who had walked their path. The Apache watched him with cautious respect, seeing someone who had proven himself in battle and earned Nalin's trust. It was Goyakla who finally put it into words, approaching Nero one evening as he sat watch over the camp. You have become something new, the warrior said, settling beside him. Not slave, not Apache, but something else. A man who lives between worlds. Is that a good thing? Nero asked. It is a necessary thing. Goyakla looked out at the darkening desert. The world is changing. The white men spread like water flooding a canyon. The Mexicans fight among themselves while losing ground to the Americans. The Apache way of life is threatened from all sides. We need people who can walk between worlds, who understand both the old ways and the new realities. He turned to look at Nero directly. Nalin believes you are such a person, that together you two can create something that bridges the gap between peoples, that offers another path besides submission or extinction. I was skeptical. But after seeing what you did at the Montoya Ranch... He paused. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps you are the storm the desert has been waiting for. I'm just a man trying to survive, Nero said, trying to help others survive. No. Goyakla's voice was firm. You are more than that now. Whether you chose it or not, you have become a symbol, a freed slave who returned to free others, a man who refused to accept his chains. That story will spread, and when it does, it will change things. Give hope to some, inspire fear in others, and create consequences none of us can fully predict. Nero felt the weight of those words settle on him. He hadn't thought about the larger implications of what they had done, had only been focused on the immediate, free the slaves, get them to safety, survive. But Goyakla was right. Stories had power. And the story of a medicine woman and a freed slave attacking a ranch and liberating 23 people was the kind of story that would spread like fire across dry grass. A week after the raid, scouts brought troubling news. Mexican authorities were investigating the attack on the Montoya Ranch. Soldiers were asking questions in nearby towns, offering rewards for information. The official story was that a band of Apache raiders had attacked, but there were rumors, whispers that one of the attackers had been a freed slave, that this was not a simple raid, but something more organized, more deliberate, more dangerous. They will come looking for us eventually, Goyakla said during the council meeting that night. The freed slaves had been invited to attend, a sign that they were being integrated into the community. Not immediately, perhaps. But they cannot let this attack go unanswered. It sets a precedent they cannot afford, that slaves can fight back successfully, that they can find protection with native peoples, that the natural order can be disrupted. Then we prepare for them, Solomon said. He had taken to Apache ways with surprising enthusiasm, proving to be a quick learner and natural leader among the freed slaves. We fortify the village, set up sentries, prepare defenses. Defense is not the Apache way, one of Goyakla's warriors countered. We do not wait for attack in fixed positions. We are mobile, adaptive. We strike and disappear. That worked when it was just Apache, Solomon argued. But now you have 22 people who aren't trained warriors, who can't move fast or far. We're your weakness now, and we all know it. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. The freed slaves were a liability, however much everyone wanted to pretend otherwise. They slowed the group down, required extra resources, and represented a clear connection between the Apache and the ranch attack. So what do we do? Esther asked. Turn ourselves in? Let ourselves be recaptured to protect you? No. Nalin's voice cut through the rising tension. She had been quiet until now, but when she spoke, everyone listened. We do not sacrifice people to convenience. That is the white man's way, the slaver's way. We are better than that. She stood, moving to the center of the circle, her wounded shoulder still stiff, but her presence commanding. Goyakla is right that we cannot simply hide and hope they do not find us. Solomon is right that the people we freed cannot yet survive as mobile warriors. Both truths exist at once, so we create a third way. She looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes. We split up. The main Apache village continues its traditional movements, maintaining mobility and security. But we create a separate settlement, hidden deep in the mountains, where the freed slaves can stay while they train and strengthen. A place that is defensible, that has water and resources, but that is not connected to the main village. That divides our strength, Goyakla protested. No, it multiplies it. Nalin's eyes glinted in the firelight. Think. If soldiers come looking for Apache who raided the ranch, they find the main village with no freed slaves present, no evidence. Just Apache living as they always have. Meanwhile, the freed slaves are safely hidden elsewhere, learning, training, becoming strong. And when they are strong, another warrior asked, then they become something new. Nalin looked at Nero, an armed group of formerly enslaved people who know the territory, who have Apache training, who can move freely because they look like the slaves and servants that move through this territory all the time. They can go places we cannot, see things we cannot see, strike targets we cannot reach. Understanding dawned on multiple faces. You want to create an army, Solomon said slowly. I want to create justice, Nalin corrected. An army implies formal structure, government backing, official purpose. What I propose is something more fluid, more dangerous, a shadow force that exists in the spaces between official power. That strikes at slavery and oppression wherever it exists, then disappears back into the desert like morning mist. The Spanish had a name for such groups, Goyakla said. Guerrillas, little wars, hit-and-run tactics, striking from hiding, melting away before official forces can respond. Yes, Nalin smiled, sharp and fierce. Exactly that. We become the little war that slavery cannot win. Because how do you fight shadows? How do you defeat people who have nothing left to lose and everything to gain? The proposal was audacious, dangerous, and possibly insane. It would require resources, planning, time, and luck. It would make enemies of every authority in the territory. It would put all of them at constant risk of capture, torture, and death. And yet, looking around the circle, Nero saw the same expression on every face. Determination mixed with hope. These people, both Apache and freed slaves, understood that the world was not going to change through patience and prayer. Change required action, required risk, required people willing to stand up and fight, even when the odds were impossible. I'm in, Nero said into the silence. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. As am I, Solomon added. Others echoed the sentiment, one by one, until the entire circle had committed. Goyakla looked at Nalin for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Finally, he nodded. You are either the wisest woman I have ever known, he said, or the most dangerous. Perhaps both. He turned to his warriors. We will help establish this hidden settlement, provide initial supplies and training, but after that, you are on your own. We cannot risk more direct connection between the main village and your activities. Understood, Nalin said, and that is as it should be. What we are creating needs to stand on its own legs, be responsible for its own survival. Over the following weeks, they scouted locations and finally found what they needed. A box canyon, high in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, accessible only through a narrow pass that could be easily defended. Inside, a year-round spring provided water, and the surrounding forest offered game and wood. Caves in the canyon walls could shelter dozens of people, and the elevation meant cooler temperatures, even in summer. It was perfect. They began building in earnest. The freed slaves, guided by Apache knowledge, constructed simple dwellings, established food storage, created defensive positions. Goyakla's warriors taught them to shoot bows, to fight with knives and clubs, to move silently through forest and desert. Nalin trained them in survival skills, in reading weather and terrain, in the 100 small pieces of knowledge that meant the difference between life and death in this harsh land. And Nero trained them in something else, purpose. He spoke to them of their shared experience, of the trauma they all carried, of the rage that lived in every person who had been treated as property. But he also spoke of transformation, of taking that rage and shaping it into something useful, something directed. "We are not seeking revenge," he told them during one gathering. "Revenge is personal, small, limited. What we seek is justice. And justice means changing the system that allowed us to be enslaved in the first place. That means freeing others. That means making slavery unprofitable, dangerous, costly. That means becoming such a threat that people think twice before trading in human flesh." "How?" Esther asked. "We're 22 people. How do we threaten an entire system?" "By being everywhere and nowhere," Nero replied. "By striking when least expected. By making every slave owner, every overseer, every trader worry that we might come for them next. Fear is a weapon, and we will wield it as surely as we wield knives and bows." He thought of Nalin's words, spoken that first night in her wiki-up, about rage that is focused, disciplined, directed. About taking what was done to you and transforming it into what you will do to them. That was what they were building here. Not just a hidden settlement, but a forge where broken people were remaking themselves into weapons of justice. As summer turned to fall, the settlement took shape. The people grew stronger, more skilled, more confident. They were no longer shuffling broken slaves, but something else. Warriors in training, dedicated to a cause larger than themselves. And in the quiet moments, when work was done and the mountain air grew cool, Nero and Nalin would sit together and plan. They marked maps showing plantations, slave routes, and trading posts. They discussed tactics, targets, and timing. They imagined a future where slavery in this territory became too dangerous, too costly, too difficult to maintain. It was an impossible dream. They both knew that. But impossible dreams were the only kind worth pursuing. One evening, as stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Nalin turned to Nero with a question she had been holding back. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "What you have become, the path we have chosen?" Nero was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I regret that it was necessary," he finally said. "I regret that the world is such that we must do these things. But do I regret choosing to fight rather than submit? No, never." "Good," Nalin smiled, "because this is only the beginning. The storm we started at the Montoya Ranch, it is just the first wind. What comes next will be the full force of the tempest. Will we survive it? Does it matter?" Nalin's expression was serene, accepting. "We will change things. That is what matters. Whether we live to see the results or die in the attempt, we will have mattered. That is more than most people can say." Nero reached out and took her hand. The gesture was simple, natural, inevitable. Two people who had walked through fire together, bound by choice and blood and purpose. "Then let the storm come," he said. "We'll face it together." And in the darkness behind them, the mountain wind began to rise. Winter came to the mountains like a slow siege. Snow fell in silent curtains, covering the landscape in white, muffling sound, transforming the world into something clean and pure and deceptively peaceful. In the hidden canyon settlement, the freed slaves and their Apache allies worked to survive the cold, to maintain warmth and food supplies, to keep training even when the weather made it difficult. But survival was not their only focus. Even as winter locked the mountains in ice, they planned for spring. For when the snow melted and movement became possible again, they would strike. Nero stood at the mouth of the canyon, looking out at the white expanse beyond. Beside him, Nalin adjusted her fur-lined cloak, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Her shoulder had healed well, leaving only a slight stiffness and a scar she bore with pride. "The scouts report that 3 more plantations have increased their security," she said. "Word of the Montoya raid has spread. They're frightened." "Good." Nero's voice was hard. "They should be frightened. They should lie awake at night wondering if we're coming for them next. But their fear makes them more dangerous. They're offering larger rewards for our capture, hiring more guards, treating their slaves more brutally to prevent escape." Nalin paused. "Some of those slaves are suffering more because of what we did." It was the moral calculus they wrestled with constantly. Every action had consequences, ripples spreading outward in ways impossible to predict or control. Freeing slaves from one plantation might inspire others, but it might also cause owners to crack down harder on those who remained. "So what do we do?" Nero asked. "Stop, let them continue unopposed because resistance makes them angry?" "No," Nalin's voice was firm. "We escalate, make the cost of slavery so high, so constant, so unbearable that they have no choice but to abandon the practice or leave the territory entirely." She pulled out a folded map, spreading it against the canyon wall. On it were marked multiple locations, plantations, trading posts, and something else, cities. The plantations are scattered, isolated, easy to strike, but ultimately limited in impact. Each one we hit frees 20, 30 people at most. Meaningful for those individuals, but not enough to change the system. She pointed to Santa Fe, marked with a red circle. But the cities, that's where the real power lies. That's where the traders operate openly, where slaves are bought and sold in public markets, where the whole apparatus of human trafficking is legitimized and protected by law. Nero studied the map. "You want to strike Santa Fe? That's suicide. It's heavily populated, full of soldiers, under Mexican authority. We'd never make it out alive." "Perhaps not alive," Nalin agreed. "But we would make a statement that echoes far beyond our deaths." "And?" She smiled slightly. "I do not intend for us to die. I intend for us to become legends." Over the following months, as winter slowly released its grip on the mountains, they refined their plan. It was audacious to the point of insanity, which was exactly why it might work. No one would expect them to be bold enough to strike at the heart of the territory's slave trade. The plan required precise timing, multiple moving parts, and more than a little luck. But it also leveraged their greatest strengths, the ability to move undetected through country others feared, the desperation of people with nothing left to lose, and the element of complete surprise. As spring arrived, they put the plan into motion. First, they needed information. Nero and 3 others, all freed slaves who could pass as servants or laborers, made their way to Santa Fe, moving separately to avoid suspicion. They observed the slave market, noted the schedules of guards and traders, mapped escape routes and safe houses. It took weeks of careful work, but gradually they assembled a complete picture of how the system operated. The slave auctions happened every Tuesday and Friday in the main plaza. Slaves were kept in holding pens near the city center, guarded but not as heavily as a military installation. The traders themselves were arrogant, complacent, convinced of their own safety within the city walls. There are usually 40 to 50 slaves in the holding pens on auction days, Nero reported when he returned to the mountain camp. Men, women, children. Some newly captured, some being resold. They're kept in terrible conditions, barely fed, no medical care, chained together like animals. "Guards?" Goyakla asked. He had committed several warriors to assist with the operation, despite the risks. 6 guards on rotation, plus however many traders are present. But the guards are lazy, more interested in drinking and gambling than actual security. They don't expect trouble in the middle of the city. They're about to get it, Solomon said grimly. He had become Nero's lieutenant, a natural leader among the freed slaves who now numbered 30. They had freed 8 more during a raid on a smaller ranch in late winter. The plan they developed was complex but elegant. On the day of a major auction, when the holding pens would be fullest, they would strike from multiple directions simultaneously. Apache warriors would create diversions at opposite ends of the city, fires, disturbances, anything to draw soldiers and guards away from the market area. Meanwhile, the freed slaves would move through the city disguised as servants and laborers. no one paying them attention, and converge on the holding pens. The goal was not a prolonged fight, but a quick liberation. Break the chains, arm the captives, and disappear into the chaos before organized resistance could form. They would have minutes at most to accomplish it. "And after?" one of the younger freed slaves asked. "After we break them out? Where do they go?" "We can't bring 50 people back to the mountain settlement. We don't try," Nalin explained. "We give them supplies, weapons if possible, and directions to multiple safe locations. Some will head to our settlement. Others will try for the north. Some might attempt to blend into the city's population of free laborers. We scatter them in different directions to make tracking impossible." "Some will be recaptured," Solomon said quietly. "Yes," Nalin agreed. "Some will, but some will make it. And every person who reaches freedom is a victory. Every slave who escapes is a crack in the system. Enough cracks, and the whole structure collapses." They chose their date carefully, a Friday in late spring, when a particularly large auction was scheduled. Traders from as far as Texas were bringing merchandise, and the holding pens were expected to be full. It would be the largest gathering of enslaved people in Santa Fe in months. The night before, the strike team gathered in a camp 5 miles outside the city. 30 freed slaves, 8 Apache warriors, and Nero and Nalin. 40 people total, preparing to attack the heart of the territory's slave trade. Nalin moved through the camp, speaking to each person individually, checking weapons, offering final words of encouragement or caution. When she reached Nero, she sat beside him in silence for several minutes before speaking. "This is different from the ranch," she said quietly. "More exposed, more dangerous, more likely to end badly. If you want to reconsider—" "I don't," Nero interrupted. "This is what we've been building toward. The ranch was about freeing specific people. This is about striking at the heart of the system, making a statement that can't be ignored. A statement written in blood," Nalin said. "Ours as much as theirs." "I know." Nero looked at her directly. "I'm not afraid of dying. I was dead when you found me in that desert. Everything since then has been borrowed time. If I die tomorrow, it will be as a free man fighting for something that matters. That's more than I ever expected to have." Nalin reached out and touched his face, a gesture of affection rare for her. "You are a good man, Nero. Slavery tried to destroy that, but it survived. I am honored to fight beside you." "The honor is mine." Nero covered her hand with his. "You gave me a reason to live beyond survival. You showed me that pain could be transformed into purpose. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for that." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 people bound by choice and blood, and a shared vision of justice, knowing that the morning would bring either triumph or death or something in between. Dawn broke clear and warm, the sky an impossible blue. The strike team moved into position before the city fully woke, disguising themselves as they had planned. The freed slaves dressed as servants, laborers, and tradespeople, while the Apache warriors positioned themselves around the city perimeter, ready to create diversions. Nero and Solomon moved through the waking city streets, carrying baskets as if heading to market. Around them, Santa Fe came to life, shopkeepers opening their stores, priests heading to morning mass, soldiers changing watch at the garrison. No one paid them any attention. Black and brown faces performing menial labor were as invisible as the dust beneath their feet. That invisibility was their weapon. They reached the plaza as the slave traders were setting up for the day's auction. The holding pens stood in the center of the square, crude wooden structures with iron bars. Inside, Nero could see them. Men, women, children, chained together, wearing the same hopeless expressions he remembered from his own time in captivity. His hand tightened on the concealed knife at his belt. "Steady," Solomon whispered. "We wait for the signal." The signal came at noon when the auction was scheduled to begin, and the plaza was at its fullest. Smoke suddenly rose from the northern quarter of the city, one of the diversions. Shouts of "Fire!" rang out. Guards started running toward the commotion. Then another fire sparked in the south and another to the east. Chaos rippled through the city as soldiers and civilians tried to respond to multiple simultaneous emergencies. "Now," Solomon said. They moved as one, 30 freed slaves converging on the holding pens from different directions. The remaining guards, confused and outnumbered, barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. Keys were seized, locks were broken. Chains fell away with the same beautiful sound Nero remembered from the Montoya ranch. "You're free!" Nero shouted into the pens, speaking quickly in English and Spanish. "We're here to help you escape, but we have to move fast. Take these weapons if you can use them. Follow us or run on your own. Just get out of here." For a moment, the newly freed slaves just stared, unable to comprehend what was happening. Then understanding dawned and they moved. Some grabbed weapons offered by the freed slaves. Others simply ran, chains still dangling from their ankles, too traumatized to do anything but flee. Parents grabbed children. Siblings found each other in the chaos. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes to break 57 people out of captivity, to arm a dozen of them, to send them scattering in all directions through the confused city. But 3 minutes was also long enough for the traders to recover from their shock and start fighting back. Gunshots rang out. One of the freed slaves went down, clutching his leg. Another fell with a bullet through his chest, dead before he hit the ground. Nero spun, lance in hand, and engaged the trader who had fired. The fight was brief and brutal, ending with the trader bleeding out in the dust. "We need to go," Solomon shouted. "The soldiers are coming!" They could hear the organized sound of troops approaching, responding to the chaos. The diversions had bought them minutes, but now those minutes were up. The strike team scattered as planned, breaking into small groups and fleeing in different directions. Nero grabbed a young girl whose mother had been shot, pulling her along as he ran. Behind them, the plaza descended into complete chaos. Freed slaves running in all directions, traders shouting, soldiers arriving to find their carefully ordered world in ruins. Nero ran through streets he had memorized during his weeks of observation, ducking through alleys, crossing rooftops, always moving, never stopping. The girl clung to him, silent with shock. Around them, the city burned. Literally in some quarters where the diversions had gotten out of control, metaphorically everywhere else. He met up with Nalin and several others at a predetermined rendezvous point outside the city walls. They were bloodied but alive, eyes wild with adrenaline and victory. "How many did we lose?" Nero asked between gasping breaths. 3 dead, 2 captured, Solomon reported, arriving moments later. "But we freed 57 and armed 12 of them, and we sent a message that will echo across every plantation in the territory." "The message cost 3 lives," Nalin said quietly, touching the pendant around her neck. "We honor them by making sure their deaths meant something." They moved quickly into the desert, putting distance between themselves and the city. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of pursuit, dogs barking, soldiers shouting, the organized chaos of an authority that had been humiliated and was desperate to restore order. But the desert was vast, and they knew its secrets. Within an hour, they had vanished into country where horses stumbled and soldiers got lost. The pursuit would continue for days, but it would be futile. As evening fell, they made camp in a hidden canyon Nalin knew. The freed slaves who had participated in the raid tended their wounds and counted their losses. The girl Nero had rescued sat close to him, still silent, still processing the enormous change in her circumstances. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Grace," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken since the plaza. "My name is Grace." "Well, Grace, you're free now. You understand that? No one owns you anymore. Your life is your own." She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering for someone so young. "What do I do now?" "Whatever you want. Learn to survive. Learn to fight. Grow strong. And when you're ready, maybe help free others like yourself." He smiled slightly. "That's what I did. That's what all of us did. In the days that followed, news of the Santa Fe raid spread like wildfire. The stories grew in the telling. Some said 100 slaves had been freed, that the entire market district had burned, that Apache warriors and freed slaves had fought side by side, that supernatural forces had been involved. The truth was less dramatic, but no less significant. They had struck at the heart of the territory's slave trade and succeeded. They had proven that the system was vulnerable, that resistance was possible, that justice could be achieved through action. The authorities responded with fury. Massive rewards were offered for the capture of the raiders. Patrols increased throughout the territory. New laws were passed, making it a capital offense to assist escaped slaves. The noose of official power tightened, but something else happened too. In slave quarters across the territory, hope sparked. If 57 people could be freed from the heart of Santa Fe, then liberation was possible. If a group of escaped slaves and Apache allies could strike and disappear, then resistance was not futile. More slaves began attempting escape. More plantations reported losses. Some owners, recognizing the shifting reality, began negotiating freedom for their slaves rather than risk violent uprising. The economics of slavery in the territory were changing, the cost-benefit analysis shifting. It was not the end of slavery. That would take decades more and a civil war to truly accomplish. But it was a crack in the foundation, and cracks, given time and pressure, can bring down even the strongest structures. Back in the mountain settlement, life continued. New people arrived, escaped slaves who had heard rumors of a safe place, of people fighting back, of a medicine woman and a freed slave who had become legends. The settlement grew, becoming more than just a hiding place, but a community, a home. Nero trained the newcomers in everything he had learned. Solomon helped organize work parties and defense rotations. The Apache warriors who had committed to the cause taught their skills. Nalin provided medicine and wisdom, guiding the community with a firm but compassionate hand. And through it all, Nero and Nalin continued to plan their next move. Because the fight was far from over, each freed slave was a victory, but thousands more remained in chains. Each successful raid was meaningful, but the system itself remained intact. One night, months after the Santa Fe raid, Nalin found Nero sitting at the edge of the canyon, looking out at the desert below. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. "You're thinking about the future," she said, settling beside him. "I'm thinking about how much has changed," he replied. "When you found me in that desert, I was ready to die, wanted to die. Now..." He gestured to the settlement behind them, to the sounds of children laughing, of people living free. "Now I have a reason to keep going, multiple reasons." "Do you think we'll live to see slavery end?" Nalin asked. "Not just resist it, but actually end it?" "I don't know." Nero was quiet for a moment. "Probably not. This fight is bigger than us, bigger than our lifetimes. But we started something. We proved it could be done. Others will continue after we're gone." "That is enough, then." Nalin looked up at the stars. "My people have a saying. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. The same is true of freedom. We do not create it for ourselves alone, but for those who come after. The earth remembers every wound," Nero said, echoing words Nalin had spoken long ago. "And so do we." "Yes," Nalin smiled, "and when the wind howls through these canyons in the years to come, it will carry our story." The medicine woman and the freed slave who refused to accept the world as it was and fought to make it different. They sat in companionable silence, two people who had walked through fire together and emerged transformed. Behind them, the settlement slept peacefully, 57 freed souls and counting. Before them, the desert stretched endlessly, full of challenges and opportunities and the promise of battles yet to come. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack. Another answered, A conversation in a language older than empires, older than slavery, older than the very concept of one human owning another. The desert remembered, the wind remembered, and two people, bound by choice and blood and purpose, sat watching the moon rise and planning their next strike against injustice. The storm they had begun would continue long after they were gone. But for now, in this moment, they were alive. They were free. And they were making a difference. That was everything, and that was enough. Years later, long after Nero and Nalin had passed into legend, travelers through New Mexico territory would sometimes report strange sightings. Two figures walking side by side across the desert at dusk, one Apache, one dark-skinned and tall, disappearing into heat shimmer before they could be approached. Old-timers would shake their heads and say those were just stories, desert mirages, tricks of light and shadow. But the Apache knew better. And the descendants of freed slaves knew better. Those two figures were not ghosts, but memory given form, the earth itself, remembering the storm that had changed everything. And when the wind howled through the red rock canyons, those who listened carefully could hear their vow, spoken first in 1845 and echoing still. The earth remembers every wound, and so do we.